I'm going to mute.
Thank you. Please mute everybody. Or everybody, please mute. So welcome. It is January 17th. It's kind of hard to believe we're already in the middle of January. And we are in the Parsha Va'era. And before we get going with that, we'll take a couple of minutes to just really settle. So I invite you to sit comfortably, eyes open or closed, allowing yourself to really feel supported where you're sitting. And breathing. So we breathe together. It's a way of us really connecting with one another as we're in our own little Zoom boxes. And we inhale and exhale. And really become fully present here now. Appreciating that we carve out this special time for ourselves. Excuse me. And the way I always like to start, breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in this present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. Excuse me 1 second. We're talking about the plagues, the first seven plagues today, and I have one of those frogs in my throat, so I apologize. So this week's Parsha is Va'era, and at the beginning of the Parsha, God reaffirms the covenant with the Israelites, and then the Parsha goes on, and we have the first seven plagues. In Exodus chapter 7, verse 3, we note that God hardens Pharaoh's heart. And so God and Moses are having a conversation, and God says, "But I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that I may multiply my signs and marvels in the land of Egypt." So I read this line, and I am really troubled by it. So questions come up to my mind. Is this an example of God's ego? And how can that be? I have a lot of trouble with that because I don't believe in a personification of God. So how does a force field or universal energy have an ego? So I don't get this. Is this a way to highlight Pharaoh's stubbornness, his ego, and his arrogance? And that maybe there's a lesson here for us that the more ego involved and arrogant you are, the more trouble you're going to have? I don't know. Or is this a way to highlight Moses's humility? he just kind of did as God commands, never taking credit for these signs and wonders, but always saying that this was the work of God. So these were the questions that were floating around in my head when I read this week's commentary in the book, the Musar Torah commentary. And this week, the midah, or character trait that's discussed, is anava, which translates as humility. So when I first saw that, I said, this is going to be interesting. So I've been really well schooled by my readings of Alan Marinus, and have, for the last several years, thought about anava, or humility, as taking one's rightful space. Not too much, not too little. Knowing when to speak up and when to stay quiet. Knowing when to step forward and when to step back. And I've talked about that in this group before, and I'm not going to dwell on that take of humility, because Rabbi Joshua Mikutas, I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly, presented anava through a slightly different lens, and I found it really interesting and a little provocative. So I'm going to share with you. He states, I want to suggest that the core to navigating any uncertain time is anava, humility. Humility is not about lowering one's self-worth, but embarking on a deep understanding of the forces that surround us, shape us, and direct our actions. And an ideal engagement with humility is not surrender, but a willingness to grapple with those absurd forces beyond our control and to proactively shape our reality into the world we seek to build. Key to anava is knowing how to understand our own place in the world. Anava should not diminish our sense of self, but sharpen our understanding of the world to show us that failure is not permanent, but a way of pushing us in a new direction. So I had not thought about developing anava as a way to manage living in an unpredictable, maybe even chaotic world. The need to be aware of the forces that surround us, shape us, and direct our actions really stood out as a new way of looking at humility for me. So he goes on to suggest that when we stumble or fail at something, that should lead us to reassess how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to the divine, and how we relate to our own narrative, the story that we make of our own lives. He also points out that the world is unpredictable, and in order to manage in an unpredictable world, we need to stay present. Excuse me. His thesis is that anava demands that we try to understand ourselves based on the context and on the forces that are larger than we are. So with anava, we can see that the results of our work might not be what we expected or even wanted, but balanced with the right amount of confidence in who we are, we can still bring good into the world. So that's where this relates to that Alan Marinus piece of taking up one's rightful space, I think. Another point that Rabbi Mikutas makes is that with anava, we're not alone. Exodus chapter 6, verse 3 states, I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob as El Shaddai, but I did not make myself known to them by my name, Yud-He Vav-He. So the point here is that we learn that Moses and the divine have a powerful relationship. Moses knows deep down that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh has his back. He's not alone. So when we practice Anava, maybe we can realize that we are not alone. It helps to remember that we're part of a story that is much larger than our little piece of it. So again, going to quote from this week's commentary. When we find ourselves in moments of difficulty, a practice of Anava can push us to ask 3 questions. How might my impact be different than expected? How can I find the divine in this moment? How can the story of those who came before me support me at this moment? If we engage in this personal reflection, we can work toward following the path of Moses, who later in the Torah is noted to be a very humble man, more so than any other being on earth. So with that, let's move into our sit. I invite you to adjust how you're sitting. And maybe check your posture. And feet flat on the floor if you're sitting in a chair. And let's lift our shoulders and bring them back and slowly down so that our shoulder blades are sliding down our back, just lifting that heart space. And from the crown of your head, lifting, lifting, lifting. So the back of your neck is in line with your spine. You might need to tuck your chin a little bit. And you might close your eyes, or you might just gaze down toward the floor. And I encourage you to connect with a focal point. It might be your breath, or it might be some physical sensation, or maybe sound. Whatever your focal point is going to be for today, that's what I encourage you to gently and compassionately return to every time your mind wanders. And we'll sit for about 12 or so minutes. I invite you to deepen your breath, slowly and very gently coming back to the room. And as you're coming back, I'm going to read God, Take Me by Your Hand by Eddie Hellesum. God, take me by your hand. I shall follow you dutifully and not resist too much. I shall evade none of the tempests life has in store for me. I shall try to face it all best as I can. But now and then grant me a short respite. I shall never again assume in my innocence that any peace that comes my way will be eternal. I shall accept all the inevitable tumult and struggle. I delight in warmth and security, but I shall not rebel if I have to suffer cold, should you so decree. I shall follow wherever your hand leads me, and shall try not to be afraid. I shall try to spread some of my warmth, my genuine love for others, wherever I go. I had a problem today. I had 3 different readings that I wanted to do after meditation. But alas, I'm only doing one.